Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, let's just dive straight into this. Picture this. You walk into literally any upscale grocery store right now, and what do you see? There's an entire brightly lit aisle entirely dedicated to gut health sodas, right? They're promising prebiotics, probiotics, natural fermentation, the whole shebang. But here is the absolutely incredible premise we're going to explore today. What if I told you that those expensive, trendy little cans everyone is obsessing over can actually be replicated right on your very own kitchen counter for pennies? Seriously, today we are unpacking the lost secret of the living soda and exactly how you can reclaim it for yourself. Now, to really wrap our heads around why this matters, we kind of have to look at the sheer scale of the modern market. Just recently, in March of 2025, PepsiCo handed over a staggering $1.95 billion for a company that basically sells fizzy water with a splash of apple cider vinegar. Billion, with a B. Meanwhile, another huge brand in the space, Olipop, is sitting on a valuation near $1.85 billion. And these little cans? They're retailing for up to $4.50 each. That is a massive corporate premium for something human beings used to just make for themselves.
But here's where it gets wild. Look at the actual cost of biological independence compared to those crazy billion-dollar valuations. We're talking about $2. That's right, the exact same drink, and honestly, an arguably far superior, truly living version of it can be assembled in your kitchen for about $2. All you need is one piece of grocery store ginger root, a spoonful of sugar, and maybe 15 minutes of actual hands-on effort.
So that raises a pretty fascinating question, right? If making this stuff was so cheap and so easy, where the heck did all the living microbes in our everyday soda actually go? Well, historically speaking, the soda industry deliberately and methodically wiped out living cultures over the course of about a century. And the reason is simple. Living biology is just unpredictable. It keeps fermenting on the warehouse shelf, it makes liquids look cloudy, it shortens shelf life, and yeah, it makes bottles unpredictably hiss and pop. From a business perspective, dead pasteurized syrup is just infinitely easier to store and sell at massive volumes. Let's take a quick look at how this shift actually happened. Back in 1855, a British tax on traditional ginger beer basically forced brewers to slash their fermentation times. Fast forward to 1904, and you have Canada Dry launching a crystal-clear, machine-carbonated, and fully pasteurized ollie ale. That essentially taught the public that clear meant modern and clean. Then, things shifted even further. In 1954, the Sugar Research Foundation started heavily pushing carbohydrates to replace fat in our diets. And by the 1960s, a research initiative known as Project 226 saw Harvard scientists actually getting paid to publish a review that pinned heart disease entirely on fat, while conveniently burying the evidence about sugar.
And you know, this perfectly captures the deep irony of that whole era. Following those new dietary guidelines, people dutifully switched over to low-fat diets. But to make up for all that lost flavor, food manufacturers just loaded products up with sweeteners. Suddenly, you had these modern, unfermented sodas dumping roughly 35 grams of completely unprocessed sugar per serving right into the human body. And because those old living cultures had been sterilized out of the drinks, there was literally nothing left to metabolize that massive sugar load before it hit the bloodstream.
To really understand what we lost, we have to look back at our ancestors. Back in the 18th and 19th centuries, drinking plain, untreated water was incredibly dangerous. I mean, think about the devastating cholera outbreaks in the 1850s. To stay safe, communities drank what they called small beers, these lightly fermented beverages where the active fermentation actually suppressed the harmful bacteria. The Amish and Mennonite communities, for example, drink something called switchel. It was this brilliant harvest drink made of water, apple cider vinegar, ginger, and a bit of sweetener that gave field workers safe hydration and a great hit of electrolytes. Okay, so the real star of the show here is the plant at the center of all this, Zingiber officinale, or just common ginger. And get this, because this detail completely changes the game. If you harvest baby ginger early, like after just 4 to 6 months in the soil, it actually contains 2 to 3 times more antioxidant activity than that big, mature ginger you buy at the store. Harvesting it young literally turns a simple patio container into your own personal botanical apothecary. It's amazing.
And demystifying the growing process? It's surprisingly simple. Ginger doesn't even grow from seeds. It propagates from a piece of its own root, which is called a rhizome. You just look for these little eyes or growth nodes on the skin and plant it about 2 inches deep in the dirt. It thrives outdoors in warmer climates, like zones 9 through 12, but it does perfectly well inside a 12-inch pot as long as the temperature stays above 55 degrees. And the best part? That one single piece of root will multiply into a massive full hand of ginger in just 8 to 10 months.
All right, now let's see how this all builds into the literal magic, the alchemy of the ginger bug.
You see, the skin of fresh, organic, unpeeled ginger isn't just a surface. It's an entire living, breathing habitat. It carries the exact same wild families of lactobacillus and Saccharomyces microorganisms that make sourdough bread rise. When you harness these specific microbes, you create a ginger bug, a wild starter culture that's going to power your entire home brewery.
Now hang on a second, I know exactly what you're thinking. Didn't we literally just talk about the dangers of dumping too much sugar into our bodies? Well, here is the secret. The sugar you add to this jar, it is fuel for the bacteria, not for you. As the microbes feed on that sucrose, they break it down into highly beneficial lactic acid, acetic acid, and natural carbon dioxide. They basically intercept the sugar and drastically reduce the drink's overall sugar load before you even take your first sip. How cool is that?
And this fermentation process actually upgrades the medicine itself. So, raw ginger contains a fantastic anti-inflammatory compound called 6-gingerol. But clinical research from 2020 revealed something absolutely incredible. When lactic acid bacteria ferment ginger, they chemically convert that 6-gingerol into a totally different compound called 6-shogiol. This newly fermented molecule delivers a significantly higher antioxidant and anti-inflammatory potency than the raw ginger did in the first place.
But wait, the math gets even better. Let's talk about bioaccessibility for a second, which is just a fancy word for how much of a compound your body can actually absorb and use. Studies show that fermenting ginger into a liquid form boosts the usable absorption of these compounds by over 7 times compared to just swallowing a commercially dried supplement capsule. So that little liquid ecosystem bubbling away on your kitchen counter outperforms the pharmacy shelf by multiples.
So, how do we actually reclaim this lost biological engine? It's so much easier than you think. It takes just 15 minutes of hands-on effort spread across 3 really simple steps: the feeding phase, the brewing phase, and finally, the bottling phase. Let's break them down. Phase 1 is the feeding phase, where you're building your starter. Now, you absolutely must use organic, unpeeled ginger here. Why? Because conventional ginger from the supermarket is often irradiated to prevent sprouting, which kills the wild yeast we need. Similarly, you have to use filtered, unchlorinated water, because the chlorine in normal tap water will instantly kill your beneficial bacteria. You just mix the chopped ginger, sugar, and water in a jar, cover it with a breathable cloth so it can get some oxygen, and then feed it a teaspoon of ginger and a teaspoon of sugar every day for about 5 to 7 days.
Now, by around day 4 or 5, things start getting exciting. When you give it a stir, you'll actually hear a distinct fizzing or hissing sound. You'll see tiny bubbles clustering at the surface, and the liquid is going to turn quite cloudy. Let me reassure you right now, if it looks cloudy, do not panic. That is absolutely not contamination. It is visible, beautiful proof of billions of beneficial microbial cells actively multiplying in your jar. Your ginger bug is officially awake and hungry.
Once your bug is awake, we move right into phase 2, the brewing phase. You're going to simmer a half gallon of water with a bunch of sliced ginger for about 20 minutes to make a nice, strong tea. And this is where you can totally get creative. Toss in some homegrown garden herbs, maybe some mint or lavender for flavor. Stir in a cup of sugar until it completely dissolves. But listen closely, because this is literally the most critical step of the whole process. You absolutely must let this tea cool down completely to room temperature. If you pour your living, breathing starter into hot tea, the heat will kill the bug instantly, and we definitely don't want that.
Phase 3 is the bottling phase. So you strain out your cooled tea and then gently stir in half a cup of the liquid from your active ginger bug jar. Pour this mixture into thick, glass, pressure-rated flip-top bottles, making sure to leave about an inch of empty space right at the top. Then, you just let these sealed bottles rest on your counter for 48 to 72 hours. During this time, those little microbes are feasting on the remaining sugar you dissolved in the tea, and as they eat, they create this beautiful, natural, creamy carbonation right inside the sealed bottle.
Okay, quick safety time out here because real pressure is building inside that glass, and we need to be careful. The single biggest mistake you can possibly make is skipping the daily burp. You must pop the caps of your bottles briefly every single day they are sitting out on the counter, just to release the excess gas. If you don't do this, the pressure can literally cause the glass to explode. Seriously. So write it on a sticky note. Burp your bottles, never use chlorinated water, and never ever pour your bug into hot tea.
So what happens to that starter jar after you take out a half cup for your batch of soda? Well, this is the true beauty of biological independence. You just top off your original ginger bug jar with a little bit more fresh water, another spoonful of sugar, and some grated ginger. It is a completely self-sustaining system. It regenerates indefinitely. If you go out of town on vacation, you simply pop the jar in the fridge to let it hibernate. You can literally brew healthy sodas every single week for years without ever having to buy a new starter.
Which brings us to one last, really provocative thought. We just recreated a billion-dollar industry's flagship product using a $2 root, a mason jar, and the wild microbes that are already living right in our environment. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other forgotten medicines and vital health practices are just waiting to be reclaimed from corporate patents and barcodes, sitting quietly right there on our kitchen counters? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Now go grab a jar and get fermenting.